My mother drained my college fund to pay for my sister's extravagant destination wedding. Years later, when my sister's millionaire husband left her bankrupt and my mother had signed away her own house to save them, my phone finally rang. They expected a bailout. What they got was a reality check. My name is Clara. For as long as I can remember, I existed entirely in the peripheral vision of my mother, Brenda Harrison. Front and center, bathed in a perpetual, blinding spotlight, was my younger sister Chloe. If you grew up in a family with a golden child, you already know the suffocating dynamic I'm talking about. It wasn't just that Chloe was favored, it was that my mother treated my sister's existence as a miraculous event that required constant, unwavering financial and emotional sacrifice. Mostly mine. Growing up in our middle-class suburban home in Ohio, the rules were unspoken but fiercely enforced. If Chloe wanted to join the elite traveling cheer squad, my mother told me I had to quit the debate team because she couldn't afford the gas to drive us both. If Chloe accidentally ruined the family camera, it was somehow my fault for leaving it on the table. You know how clumsy she is, Clara. You should have protected her, my mother would say, her tone dripping with that terrifying, quiet disappointment. But the real betrayal, the one that fractured our family irrevocably, happened when I was 19. My father had passed away when I was 12, leaving behind a modest life insurance policy. My mother had sworn up and down that $80,000 of it was sitting in a high-yield savings account, meant to be split evenly between Chloe and me for college. I didn't want to be a burden, so I worked weekends at a local diner, saving every tip in a shoebox under my bed to cover my textbooks and rent. I had just finished my freshman year at the State University, maintaining a 3.9 GPA when the bottom dropped out. I went to the bursar's office to pay for my sophomore fall semester. The teller swiped my debit card, frowned, and said the words that made my blood run cold. "I'm sorry, honey. Your card is declining." I rushed to the local bank branch, my heart hammering against my ribs. I asked the teller to print my statement. I will never forget the physical sensation of looking at that piece of paper. The account, the one with my $40,000 safely tucked away, had a balance of $14.32. There had been a massive wire transfer 3 weeks prior. I drove to my mother's house in a blind panic, thinking she had been hacked or scammed. I burst through the front door, waving the bank statement. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, casually sipping her chamomile tea, flipping through a glossy bridal magazine. Chloe, then 18 and fresh out of high school, was sitting across from her, excitedly pointing at a floral arrangement. "Mom, the bank account!" I gasped, out of breath. "The college money is gone. Someone wired it out." My mother didn't even flinch. She slowly closed the magazine and looked up at me with a gaze so cold it could have frozen boiling water. "Nobody stole it, Clara," she said evenly. "I transferred it. Chloe is engaged." The room started to spin. "Engaged? To who? And what does that have to do with my tuition?" "Spencer Davenport," Chloe chimed in, flashing a diamond ring that looked entirely too heavy for her finger. Spencer was a 26-year-old local entrepreneur who drove a leased BMW and wore suits that looked expensive but smelled like cheap cologne and bad decisions. He had been dating Chloe for 6 months. "Spencer's family has expectations," my mother explained, her voice taking on a lofty, pretentious tone she only used when trying to impress the neighbors. "They are having a destination wedding in Lake Como, Italy. Chloe needs a wedding that reflects her new social standing. You're smart, Clara. You're resilient. You'll figure out a way to pay for school. Chloe needs this. She's fragile. That was the magic word. Chloe was a grown woman who had never worked a day in her life, but she was fragile, so she was entitled to the foundation of my future. "You stole $40,000 from me to pay for a party?" I screamed, tears finally spilling over. "Don't you dare raise your voice to me in my house," my mother snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "It was my money to distribute as I saw fit. You have always been so selfish, Clara. You can take out student loans like everyone else. Now leave. You're ruining your sister's special moment." I left. I walked out of that house and didn't speak to either of them for a year. I took out crippling student loans. I worked 2 jobs. I survived on ramen and pure, unadulterated spite. During that time, I met David Miller. David was an accountant, grounded, practical, kind, and fiercely protective of me. He didn't wear flashy watches or brag about imaginary business deals like Spencer. He built a quiet, safe life with me. When David and I got married 3 years later, it was a modest ceremony in a local botanical garden. We paid for it ourselves. I sent my mother an invitation out of a lingering, pathetic sense of obligation. She showed up late, complained loudly about the humidity, and barely looked at David. Chloe attended wearing an ivory, floor-length lace gown, a literal wedding dress. When my maid of honor offered to spill red wine on her, I just laughed and said, "Let her. She needs the attention." I thought I had made peace with the dynamic. I thought the worst was behind us. I had no idea how far my mother was willing to fall for her golden child. Over the next 5 years, Chloe and Spencer's life looked like something out of a reality TV show, and my mother made sure I knew every agonizing detail of it. Even though I had established strong boundaries, Brenda Harrison found ways to weaponize my sister's wealth. If I called my mum on her birthday, she would spend the entire phone call bragging. Spencer just bought Chloe a brand new Range Rover for Tuesday. She would casually drop into the conversation. Or, they're building a custom 10,000 square foot mansion in an exclusive gated community in Buckhead. It's going to have a double sweeping staircase. Not that you and David would understand. Your little starter home is quaint. David and I had bought a 3-bedroom fixer-upper. We were proud of it. We spent our weekends painting walls and laying down laminate flooring. We were building equity, aggressively paying down my student loans, and sleeping soundly at night. But behind the glossy Instagram photos and my mother's relentless bragging, Spencer Davenport was a fraud. It started with whispers. Mutual friends from our hometown would bump into me and mention that Spencer's tech consulting firm had been sued by contractors. Then David, who had a sharp eye for financial red flags, noticed that the custom mansion in Buckhead had been sitting half-finished for over a year. The builder's liens were public record. I decided to keep my mouth shut. It wasn't my circus, not my monkeys. Then came Thanksgiving, 2021. My mother invited David and me to her house. It was the house I grew up in on Elmwood Drive, a 4-bedroom colonial completely paid off by my late father's life insurance. We almost didn't go, but David convinced me to make an appearance. When we arrived, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Spencer was pacing the living room, sweating profusely through his designer shirt, aggressively chewing on a toothpick. Chloe was sitting on the sofa, looking uncharacteristically pale. Halfway through the dry turkey, my mother clinked her glass. "I have wonderful news," she announced, beaming at Spencer. "I'm selling the house." I stopped chewing. "What?" "Why?" "The house is paid off, Mum. You're set for retirement here." "Because," she said proudly, "Spencer has offered me the investment opportunity of a lifetime. He is expanding his commercial real estate portfolio. I'm selling this house, giving Spencer the capital, $600,000, and in return, I'm getting a 30% return on my investment every year. Plus, they are building me a luxury in-law suite in the Buckhead mansion. I'll be living like a queen." David choked on his water. He put his napkin down and looked directly at Spencer. "You're taking your mother-in-law's primary residence to fund a commercial venture. Do you have an SEC filing for this fund? What's the underlying asset? Because if it's the Buckhead property, public records show 3 mechanical liens on it right now." The room went dead silent. Spencer's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. "I don't need to explain high-level finance to a bean counter," he spat out. I turned to my mother, desperation clawing at my throat. I didn't care about the money. I knew I would never see a dime of it anyway. But I didn't want my mother to be homeless. "Mum, please listen to me," I begged, leaning across the table. "Do not do this. Do not sell your home. If his business is so successful, he can get a loan from a bank. Banks ask for collateral. You are giving him your life savings on a promise. This is a Ponzi scheme." Chloe burst into theatrical tears. "How can you be so evil, Clara? You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me and Spencer." My mother stood up, her chair screeching violently against the hardwood floor. She pointed a trembling finger at the front door. "Get out, both of you. I will not have you disrespect my son-in-law in my own home. You are a bitter, jealous woman, Clara. I am going to be rich, and you are going to be stuck in your miserable, mediocre life." "If you sign those papers," I said, my voice eerily calm as I grabbed my coat, "do not call me when it all comes crashing down, because I won't answer." "I would rather die than ask you for a penny," my mother spat. We left. True to her word, my mother listed the house the next week. It sold for $620,000 in cash. She wired every single cent to Spencer Davenport's LLC. Then, because the luxury in-law suite in Buckhead wasn't finished yet, she moved into a cramped, overpriced apartment, paying rent out of her meager Social Security check, waiting for her kingdom to be built. 2 years passed in total silence. David and I thrived. I got promoted to Senior Director of Marketing at my firm. David made partner at his accounting agency. We paid off our mortgage. We traveled. We had peace. I kept tabs on them only through the grapevine. The updates grew increasingly grim. The Buckhead mansion was foreclosed on by the bank. Spencer's business was investigated for defrauding investors. Chloe's Instagram went from private jets and designer bags to completely dark. I knew the collapse was happening. I could feel the shockwaves from miles away. It happened on a rainy Tuesday night in November. David and I were sitting by the fireplace, drinking wine and playing Scrabble. At exactly 11:42 p.m., my phone lit up on the coffee table. The caller ID read, "Mom, do not answer." David looked at the screen, then looked up at me, his eyebrows raised. "Do you want me to decline it?" I stared at the glowing rectangle. 2 years of silence. 2 years of being called jealous, mediocre, and bitter. 2 years of knowing that the woman who was supposed to protect me had handed everything she owned to a con artist just to keep her favorite daughter draped in temporary luxury. "No," I said softly, reaching for the phone. "I want to hear this." I swiped to answer and put it on speakerphone, setting it back down on the table. "Hello?" I said. On the other end, there was a ragged, sharp intake of breath. Then, a sound I had never, ever heard in my entire 32 years of life. Brenda Harrison, the woman of iron pride and blistering condescension, was violently, hysterically sobbing. The sound coming from the phone was a deep, guttural weeping, the sound of a woman whose entire, carefully constructed universe had just imploded. David reached out and gently rested his hand over mine, his thumb stroking my knuckles in a silent show of solidarity. "Clara? Clara, are you there?" my mother choked out, her voice frantic and thin. "I'm here, Mum. What's wrong?" I kept my voice perfectly level. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of panic, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate my emotions out of the gate. "It's gone. It's all gone, Clara," she wailed, blowing her nose loudly into the receiver. "Spencer, there were men in windbreakers, federal agents. They showed up at the apartment at 6 a.m. They kicked the door in. Clara. They took his computers, his phones, even the Rolex he bought Chloe for her birthday. They froze his bank accounts. They froze my bank account because he had his name on it to manage the portfolio." I closed my eyes. The reality of it was heavier than the anticipation. "Where is Spencer?" "He's in federal custody," she sobbed. "They're charging him with wire fraud and money laundering. Chloe is completely catatonic. She hasn't stopped shaking for 4 hours. The landlord of my apartment complex just slipped an eviction notice under the door because Spencer's LLC was paying the rent, and the check bounced. We have nothing. Clara, we don't even have money for groceries." Then came the pivot. The sharp, inevitable pivot I had spent my entire life bracing for. The sobbing subsided, replaced by the familiar, demanding tone of a mother who believed she was owed the world. "I need you to wire me $20,000 immediately for a defense retainer," Brenda said, the desperation hardening into an order. "And David needs to come pick us up. We are packing our bags right now. We are going to have to stay in your guest room until this blows over. Chloe is too fragile to deal with a shelter or a cheap motel. She needs family." David let out a sharp breath through his nose, his jaw tightening. I looked at the fireplace. The flames were steady, warm and comforting. I thought about the 19-year-old girl who had stood in a bank lobby, staring at a balance of $14.32, crying because her mother had handed her college education to a man wearing cheap cologne. I thought about the years of being called mediocre, jealous, and bitter. "Mum," I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the room. "The answer is no." There was a dead silence on the line. Even the background noise seemed to stop. "What did you just say to me?" she whispered, the ice returning to her voice. I said no. "I am not wiring you a single dime, and you are absolutely not moving into my house. Clara Harrison, I am your mother. Your sister is suffering. How can you be so utterly heartless? We are out on the street." "You put yourself on the street," I replied, the truth ringing out with absolute clarity. "2 years ago, I sat at your dining room table and begged you not to sell the house Dad worked his entire life to pay off. I warned you, Spencer was a fraud. David warned you, he was a fraud. You threw us out. You told me I was a bitter, jealous woman, and that you would rather die than ask me for a penny." "That was different. I didn't know," she shrieked. "You cannot hold that against me now. We are family." "Family is a two-way street, Mum. You cannot burn my bridge to the ground, salt the earth around it, and then act surprised when you can't walk across it to escape a fire." Suddenly, there was a scuffle on the other end of the line. The phone changed hands. "You psycho bitch!" Chloe screamed into the microphone, her voice shrill and hysterical. "My husband is in jail. I am a victim. You have all that money saved up, you and your boring husband. You owe us. If you don't come get us right now, I swear to God I will ruin you." "Ruin me with what, Chloe?" I asked, completely unfazed. "Your negative bank balance? Your husband's federal indictment? You aren't a victim. You willingly turned a blind eye to where the money was coming from because you liked driving a Range Rover and wearing Chanel. You stole my college fund, and then you stole Mum's retirement. You bled her dry, and now that there's no blood left, you're looking at me. The bank is closed." "I hate you," Chloe sobbed violently. "I have always hated you." "I know," I said softly, "and that's exactly why you aren't crossing my threshold." I hung up the phone. Then, with a deep, cleansing breath, I blocked both of their numbers. David looked at me, his eyes full of awe and deep respect. He poured me another glass of wine and slid it across the table. "Are you okay?" he asked. "For the first time in my life," I said, taking a sip. "I really am. Karma, I've learned, rarely descends like a cinematic lightning bolt from the heavens. It isn't a sudden, explosive moment of divine retribution that wraps everything up in a neat little bow. In the real world, karma is a slow, agonizing, and methodical unspooling. It is the inescapable, day-by-day consequence of your own arrogance, greed, and cruelty finally catching up to you, dragging you down by the ankles until you can no longer breathe. The aftermath of Spencer Davenport's spectacular downfall dominated our local news cycles for the better part of a year. He wasn't just a bad businessman who got in over his head. He was a prolific, calculated predator. The federal investigation laid bare a labyrinthine Ponzi scheme that had systematically defrauded 43 investors out of nearly $7.5 million. These weren't faceless megacorporations he was stealing from. They were retirees, local small business owners, and gullible family members, like my mother. Spencer had used fresh capital to pay fake dividends to early investors, while funneling the lion's share into offshore accounts and the lavish, hollow lifestyle he and Chloe paraded on social media. The trial was a masterclass in humiliation. I chose not to attend, but the local papers and my network of hometown acquaintances kept me thoroughly informed. Spencer, permanently stripped of his custom Italian suits and manicured bravado, looked shrunken and pathetic in a standard-issue county jumpsuit. Chloe attended the proceedings every single day, clinging desperately to a fading Birkin bag, wearing oversized designer sunglasses like a disgraced celebrity. She genuinely believed she could cry her way out of the consequences, loudly playing the victim to any court reporter who would point a microphone in her direction. But Judge Carter was utterly impervious to her theatrical tears. He handed Spencer an 8-year sentence in a federal penitentiary with absolutely no possibility of early parole, alongside a crushing, permanent order to pay full restitution to his victims. When the judge's gavel finally fell, Chloe's house of cards didn't just collapse, it incinerated. Without Spencer's stolen millions bankrolling her existence, her high society buckhead friends dropped her with breathtaking speed. Nobody in those elite, image-obsessed circles wants the stench of a convicted federal felon rubbing off on their country club memberships. Panicking, she tried to retreat to Spencer's parents' home in the affluent suburbs, but they had also lost a significant portion of their retirement to his ventures. Blaming Chloe's relentless, exorbitant demands for luxury as the primary catalyst for Spencer's desperation, they literally shut and locked the front door in her face. For the first time in her 26 years of life, the golden child was forced to face the brutal, unforgiving machinery of the real world. Armed with no college degree, zero work experience, and a resume that consisted entirely of planning a lavish destination wedding with stolen money, Chloe plummeted to the very bottom of the economic ladder. Today, the woman who once wore a floor-length ivory gown to my wedding just to upstage me is working 38 hours a week at a harsh, fluorescent-lit mall kiosk, aggressively spraying samples of cheap celebrity perfumes at irritated shoppers. She takes the public city bus because her leased Range Rover was seized by the bank. She lives in a cramped, poorly ventilated studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, splitting the exorbitant rent with a stranger she met on the internet. Her Instagram, once a daily shrine to her unearned wealth, has been deactivated entirely. But the most tragic and profound justice was reserved for my mother, Brenda. Brenda Harrison learned the hardest, most devastating lesson a parent can ever learn. Playing favorites has a catastrophic, life-altering price. Because Spencer's LLC was immediately seized by the federal government, my mother's $620,000 vanished into the massive, tangled web of the Federal Restitution Fund. As an uncredited investor who had willingly wired her money into a fraudulent, unregistered entity, she was placed at the very bottom of the priority list to recoup her losses. The government liquidated everything Spencer owned, but it only amounted to pennies on the dollar. She never saw a single cent of the money my father had literally worked himself into an early grave to secure. At 68 years old, instead of living out her twilight years in a sprawling, luxury in-law suite while being waited on hand and foot, Brenda had to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The woman who used to haughtily mock my quaint starter home now resides in a sterile, cinder-block, government-subsidized senior housing complex on the outskirts of town. The deepest cut of all, however, wasn't financial. It was the crushing realization of who Chloe truly was. When Brenda lost everything, she fully expected Chloe to be her emotional rock and caretaker. Instead, Chloe, angry, broke, and stripped of her privileges, lashed out. With no more money to extract, Chloe simply stopped answering my mother's calls. The golden child abandoned her primary sponsor the exact second the gold ran out. Now, to pay for her essential utilities, Medicare premiums, and basic groceries, Brenda works as a greeter at a massive big-box hardware store. She stands on unforgiving concrete floors for 8 hours a day in a scratchy blue polyester vest, handing out promotional circulars to people who barely acknowledge her existence. Occasionally, the ghosts of my past try to drag me back into the drama. A few months ago, I ran into Susan Henderson, a notorious hometown gossip and former friend of my mother's, at a local farmer's market. Susan practically cornered me by the organic tomatoes, her eyes brimming with weaponized pity. "Clara, it's just awful about your mother," Susan whispered loudly, leaning in. "I saw her at the hardware store last week. She looked so exhausted, standing on that concrete all day with her bad knees. And you and David are doing so incredibly well. You have that gorgeous, spacious house. Couldn't you just build her a little room in the basement? It's the Christian thing to do. She's your mother, after all." I didn't flinch. I looked Susan dead in the eye, my voice perfectly steady and crystal clear. "Susan, my mother made a deliberate $620,000 investment in her favorite daughter. She is currently living on the exact returns of that investment. I am not stepping in to disrupt her financial choices. If you feel so strongly about her living conditions, I highly recommend you offer her your guest room." Susan's mouth snapped shut, and she practically sprinted in the other direction. It sounds incredibly cold to outsiders. I know it does. But true, lasting healing often requires a ruthlessness that polite society simply doesn't understand and cannot stomach. Despite my strict boundaries, I didn't completely abandon her to starve in the cold. I am not a monster. I simply refuse to be a victim or a martyr anymore. David and I set up a secure, anonymous grocery delivery service that sends basic, life-sustaining staples, rice, chicken, frozen vegetables, ground coffee, and toilet paper, to her subsidized apartment on the 1st and 15th of every month. It costs us about $150, a drop in the bucket for our current household budget, and it ensures she will never actually go hungry. But she doesn't know it's from us. She likely assumes it's a government assistance program for low-income seniors, and I will never, ever tell her the truth. It is the absolute maximum extent of my filial duty, delivered entirely on my terms, without opening a single door to her manipulation. My life now is defined by a profound, unshakable peace. My career is thriving. David is the most fiercely supportive partner I could have ever asked for. And last spring, we welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world. Every evening, when I hold my daughter in the rocking chair, I look down at her perfect, sleeping face and make a silent, unbreakable vow. I will never compare her to anyone else. I will never drain her future to fund a superficial illusion. I will never, not for a single second, make her feel like she has to earn her basic right to exist in my heart by standing in the suffocating shadow of someone else. Generational trauma is a heavy, rusted iron chain. It is passed down from mother to daughter, linking us to the mistakes, the blatant favoritism, and the toxic expectations of the past. It takes immense, agonizing strength to pull it apart. My mother actively chose to weld herself to it. Chloe chose to wrap it around her neck and parade it around like designer jewelry. But me? I grabbed the heavy bolt cutters, I severed the link completely, and I finally walked free into the light. If Clara's journey of setting brutal but necessary boundaries resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support. Dealing with toxic family dynamics is incredibly isolating, so share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that protecting your peace is never selfish. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of dramatic karma, survival, and ultimate vindication.